Hello, welcome to the technical working group call for Thursday, the 2nd of December. Before we start launching into the contents of the call, I'm just going to ask everyone to introduce themselves in the order in which they appear on my screen. First of all, Debbie, can you introduce yourself?
Sorry, yeah, Debbie Giordano, everyone active. Just to make you aware, I don't think Andy Gordon will be joining us today. I think he's ill at the moment.
Oh, okay. Thank you for letting us know. Matt.
Matt Davies, Sports League and Venue Management Software.
Thank you, Matt. Nick.
Hello, Nick Evans. I'm in. Sorry to hear that, Debbie. That's annoying.
And I am Timothy Hill of the Open Data Institute. So the topic of the call today, we're really going to continue working through the document. Let me just bring up the presentation here. Can everybody see the presentation? Great. So in the last call, we had a lot of conversations about dependent accounts, including whether they were dependent with an E or dependent with an A. I have arbitrarily landed on A. However, we can continue that discussion in the Slack channel. It's in the OpenActive Slack space. So we looked at dependent account requirements. Unfortunately, I think there were further meetings required to clarify these, partly amongst MCR Active, Gladstone, and Everyone Active, in order to determine more precisely the exact requirements from MCR Active's perspective. And then a further call to discuss what to do when required information with regard to parents or guardians differed on the broker and the booking system end. So there will be a W3C call for that in the near future. We also talked about how to model access codes like PIN codes as opposed to access passes. Welcome, Nathan. Nathan, we're just reviewing the contents of the previous call before we move on to the agenda for this one.
Okay, sure thing.
So we covered how to model access codes as opposed to access passes like barcodes. This was fairly simple because we, in fact, already have a schema.org construct for access codes. And in terms of the booking spec, they can live at the order item level rather than being associated with customers. So those didn't require any special treatment as it turned out. And then finally, we had a discussion about what to do in cases where the account holder for a customer account was not a person, but an organization. The decision being to maintain single API endpoints for dealing with both persons and organizations, and to update some of the nomenclature, but otherwise leave the proposal unchanged. So in this call, there's a whole tranche of related concerns to be dealt with in the appendices, C6, C7, and C9, dealing with entitlements, or what we're currently still calling entitlements. The evidence request action, which is in cases where we need to produce evidence for entitlement. Yeah, sorry about that. How you update customer accounts with personal information, and then a few appendices relating specifically to the endpoints related to those appendices. And then section 5 we should look at, associating a barcode with a customer account. This should largely be review. I think we've already dealt with this, generally speaking, under the previous discussions with access passes. So this is more of a sense check. Looking in more detail in Appendix D5 at the precise API endpoint for that. And then finally in section 6, associating an entitlement to a customer account, which wraps up a lot of the material in the previous appendices. So before I launch in, however, did anybody else have anything they felt should be added to the agenda here? Okay, great. Oh, sorry, I don't need to advance. I need to actually go to the document. Here we go. Okay, so Appendix C6, this is really just how we model entitlements. And I think the question that jumped out for me here was actually, how do we envisage entitlement type being maintained? Because this is going to be a SCOS concept list of different entitlement types. And I actually wasn't clear from the documentation where this information resided.
Sure. I'm just sorry. I was always eating my lunch at the beginning of this call.
Oh, sorry.
No, not at all. Just to explain why I'm appearing and disappearing. Save you all that sight. So the idea with this one was that the SCOS, anyone that's providing a list of entitlements, most likely brokers, but they could be booking systems. It could actually be any actor, maintains their own SCOS controlled vocabulary for use by whoever's interested in linking to those entitlements. So, and the reason for that is to centralize the terms, the entitlements that are used wherever they're being defined. So if they're defined by the broker can put them there. If they're defined by the seller can have them, whoever has them. And then everyone else is referencing those in the same way the activity list works, but a bit more decentralized. So using the kind of, I suppose, decentralized nature of SCOS rather than OpenActive necessarily maintaining a list. And there might be a conversation worth having about whether having a catalog of these is helpful. I don't know. I'm not sure if there's that much value in. I know that one of the comments on here might have been from you, Tim, was like, oh my goodness, a catalog of these might be kind of a big thing to worry about and maintain. And I kind of I totally understand. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's not. Yeah, I don't know if there's utility in that catalog really, other than saving some admins copying and pasting some IDs. That which might be worth it, but I don't know if at this stage we need to define that. Maybe that's something that comes out later, possibly, because also who decides what's the criteria for things getting added to that catalog as well. So
yeah, I mean, I think I agree that the question of whether you have some sort of centralized giant list of these things, I think doesn't need to be answered right now. I think what I don't understand is in a more particular context, like say MCR Active or Active Westminster, what kinds of entitlements exist will be defined on the broker side, I suppose, by MCR Active, by this initiative. How is that communicated to booking systems and to brokers who want to implement, I suppose?
So I just pinged on the chat a link to the MCR Active entitlements. This might be a good example to see how what kind of specifically we're talking about here. So MCR Active have defined a list of entitlements. That's just how anyone who connects to MCR Active, same with Westminster, they have any MCR Active user can have these entitlement levels associated with them, and therefore they're the entitlements that can be added and removed from booking systems that are related. And so it's kind of that common language between all the systems involved. And the alternative approaches to doing this were every system kind of exposes their own stuff, and then the mapping exists in MCR. But that's an interesting breaking of an abstraction in some ways, because it kind of creates this situation where whatever system complexity exists, and in some systems you might have to add 2 entitlements, for example, to make one, and you have to navigate why those things are set up like that, and also those things can change, right? And systems can change their internals at any time. So rather than exposing all of that complexity out and then having to kind of maintain it in MCR land, centralizing it makes it easier from a kind of seller that's using a booking system perspective, because as long as they use the ID, it doesn't really matter how they achieve this within Gladstone, what subs are used, the subs can change. It's all kind of internal detail really. And that doesn't need to get exposed anywhere outside of that system or that seller. So, you know, those sub codes and things don't need to be pushed into open data land or, you know, exposed to brokers. So there's that element, which is kind of ease of administration for everybody and a common language. The other element is in terms of smaller booking systems. So it obviously, in the case of this working for kind of a Gladstone and everyone active, that's one level of, and that kind of explanation there is how that might work. If we were going to work this with, for example, say BookTech or a Bookwhen or one of those kind of systems that has lots and lots of sellers, then you can imagine that it's not feasible anymore at that point for the broker to look after the linking and the configuration and the mapping, because you might be talking about hundreds of different sellers that all have to, you know, and you have to, for each of those sellers, they have their own internal discount structure and they have to map that. So by putting this mapping in the systems, then that means is that for Bookwhen, for example, they can stick this list in their system, and they can just have all of their sellers choose, you know, what discounts to apply to which. I believe that's a plan that everyone, the MCR Active has actually in Manchester, not initially, but eventually, to allow the other sellers that are, you know, the long tail, I suppose, of sellers to choose to apply discounts to the people that according to this list. So, and that kind of, that was almost the most convincing of the arguments for this approach versus others, because without centralizing lists, you just simply can't make this work for the long tail. I mean, it does, you know, that just kind of explodes into a whole other problem. And so hence this approach being proposed.
Okay. So yeah, so it's centralized in the sense that everyone who's participating or wants to participate in sharing data in this way has got this one resource to point to, which is, you know, easy and cheap to host and all those things. How do they know that it exists and get this URL? Is this once again sort of a conversation to be had?
Yeah, so I mean that's it. Without a catalog, we're probably in the realms of, you know, that URL, the URL of this list, which is the ID at the top there, being provided to the seller, you know, and then they can obviously choose from the drop down. But that URL getting provided manually, if you want to, you know, connect to MCR, then, you know, you need to paste this into your booking system, and then you can choose.
Right. Okay. So this just needs to be, I guess, documented procedurally somewhere, because yeah, as part of the specification, this is fine, but I guess we need to document at some point when sharing data, a list of entitlement types is required. You should make people aware of it in the following way, something along those lines. So I'm a bit vague because I don't really understand I feel like there's a wide variety of organizational possibilities there. And the general solution of, yeah, somebody has to host this list, I guess, is fairly clear. But it's a requirement that I guess needs to be flagged up sort of fairly early on, that somebody needs to take responsibility. And I suppose there's risks of a mismatch as well, that if you've got this centralized resource and it gets updated, how does everybody know that it's been updated? And how do you deal with changing identifiers? Is the recommendation that identifiers never get changed? Those kinds of questions fall out of that. I mean, sort of all of the same questions that arise with the activity list, really.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that if in this kind of real world scenario, if there's identifiers changing for MCR, then there's going to need to, that would only happen if there's a discount a list of entitlements changing. If that happens, then there's obviously either it's only going to affect the big systems like Everyone Actives and GLLs, in which case there's a conversation that's obviously going to happen in the back there. We're going to change our entitlements. Can we update that? There's a whole discussion that happens as part of that. You can add the new ones on, take the old ones off the list after, that kind of thing. If it's for the smaller systems, then the migration path for small systems and all that, as a whole other world of fun. But I suppose again that may be something that comes out in detail of when people choose to implement that. I'm not sure if creating a central catalog really solves that problem. If anything, I wonder if creating a central catalog almost creates the expectation that this will all just magically work. Just connect to the catalog and then all your IDs will resolve, rather than having a clear relationship.
Oh yeah, that actually wasn't my suggestion. It was actually a question about whether that was being implied that I had. Yeah.
So sorry, what you points there, I was just capturing those two. So deal with identifiers, changing, and other things you mentioned.
Yeah, how updates the list are handled, really. Changing identifiers would be the most destructive one, I suppose. Yeah. But if you start adding entitlements or removing them, you end up with other difficulties.
Yeah. And where and how that ID is exchanged.
Yeah. So how about other people on this call? Is this a sort of architecture that makes sense to people? Are there anything here that concerns individuals on the call? Looks like a big shrug from Matt.
I think that makes sense for me.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then down at the bottom of this, the evidence request action. So we've got this construct down here. So this is in cases where an entitlement, I suppose this is about, for example, this would be something about indicating that you were indeed residing in the geographical area covered by the scheme, or you were a particular age or of a particular sex, and they're therefore entitled to that.
Yeah, likely things like universal credit. And
right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, I think my questions regarding this were almost more about the world that they inhabit more than the particular technical representation, because the assumption is that there's some kind of API entry point that can be used to check that the evidence is complete. And I just wasn't too clear how that got summoned into being, to be honest.
Oh, so that's not the entry point there, isn't to check that. That's the link to resolve the to complete the evidence request.
Right. So okay, so the assumption is just that there's a digitized document somewhere that
so the evidence requests seem to be if they're managed by the booking system or someone on that side, then the evidence request kind of life cycle lives on the booking system side. It could live on the broker side, in which case this isn't used, I suppose, at all. But if it was living on the booking system side, like it is with GLL, for example, then the idea is that the evidence request action is returned when you add the entitlement, basically saying that you need to go to that URL and upload your document and everything. You need to do that.
Oh, okay, so it's assuming that there is. Okay, now I understand. So systems do have this kind of functionality already, and this is just the URL pointing to it. Okay.
Exactly. You log in and do the thing that you would do normally, and then the action status then changes from so it changes to complete action status when it's active while waiting for that person to go and upload the documents. It changes to complete when it's done. So therefore, you can, as a booking system, as a broker, you can display this kind of in a good place. Please upload your thing, otherwise you're going to lose your discounts. But I think people get discounts until proven otherwise. I think that's how it works.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
In I think all systems that we've spoken to, I think that's right. Is that right, Debbie? You get the discount until you're proven not to have.
I mean, from our perspective, we've discussed this before, and we haven't got an online solution for somebody to upload that information. So, as it stands, the customer is required to provide the proof at the time they're joining, because they're doing it in centre and they're doing it with a colleague for those particular discounted membership offers. So we haven't got an online solution for it, so there wouldn't be an assumption at the moment.
Yes.
As far as people joining on concession memberships through this journey, my understanding is that GLL might have something, but we haven't got something to take the user off and upload evidence unless we use something that we're trialing, but it's not it's by no means a flawless solution. It's a work in progress and probably only an interim solution as well. No, it's not the ideal at all.
And for that kind of work in progress, or the way you see that going, is that also going to take the assumption that they're going to be given discount until it turns out they don't need it, or they're not qualified for it?
I mean, the one that we're working on, or we've got sort of in progress, is yes, you've joined on a concession membership, and we're asking you to provide proof. We've not seen that proof yet, and at a certain point after you've joined, we're going to remind you to do it, and then if you've not done it by another point, we'll upgrade you. But upgrade is obviously not necessarily that relevant to MCR, but it is to our memberships. So, yes, it's probably along those lines. Yeah.
Brilliant. So they get the discount. It's almost you're erring on the side of their telling in their best interest. Yeah.
Okay.
Wasn't part of the MCR Active advantages that people don't have to prove this stuff over and over again? I thought that was part of the attraction of that, is that you prove yourself to MCR Active, and then shouldn't the booking systems trust that MCR Active have taken whatever steps necessary to ensure that this person is entitled to this entitlement, and therefore the kind of from the booking system side of things, it's almost redundant.
Yes, that's really interesting. So that is a bit of complexity that is actually not in the spec, but could be. But the way that is currently, so basically the idea is that the booking systems, as it currently stands, as the booking systems can have this kind of evidence request if they support it, as Debbie mentions, not all do. And then that is a useful flow for the broker to know that, yeah, if that entitlement, if the evidence request gets rejected, then the broker will be informed of that. The broker may choose, and this is maybe something we could add to guidance or to just notes that this is a way that it can work. The broker may choose to count one of the booking systems as authoritative in terms of one of these flows is the one that the user goes through, and as long as and then, so let's say that there were four booking systems involved, the entitlement gets set on all booking systems at the same time. When they get the entitlement set, one of those booking systems comes back with an evidence request, because that's the one that the broker has agreed with that seller that will be the one that carries that burden. If the evidence request gets rejected, then the broker removes the entitlements from all systems, and so they kind of coordinate that. From the specs perspective, obviously, it doesn't. I mean, it's the same way. Having an entitlement that doesn't have a evidence request associated with it, or does, obviously that's the thing there, that it will be that some have it, and some entitlements do and don't. So there's no like additional complexity on the booking system or spec side, but that coordination could be a pattern the broker could use to make sure that, as you say, they don't go through multiple of those.
Okay. Yeah, it still seems a slight disconnect that it's the broker who is responsible for determining whether the person has an entitlement, but then they're going to actually ask a booking system to prove that. But if that's all been discussed and agreed or whatever, then so be it.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because it's the broker having the capacity to do the thorough checks against these particular types of documents, which in some cases, like in the Manchester case, that's actually something they're contracting out to the booking system to do as a service. The staff that do it. In Westminster's case, I believe it's all automated under the single sign-on solution they have. So there won't be evidence requests, I don't think, in Westminster, because because they'll know, as you say, they're the point of responsibility. So I suppose it depends on how advanced, just for local authority use case, it depends on how advanced that authority is. If they've already got themselves their own house in order, then they know everything they need to know. If they're still in the process of bringing that house in order, and maybe they're needing to outsource that to their booking systems for a bit or for a while, and this is another way of doing that.
Cool.
So, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud so that I understand this. So it is the case in real life that knowledge of the entitlement could reside either with the booking system or with the broker, depending on particular administrative realities.
Knowledge of well, I suppose the proof of the evidence request.
Right. Yeah.
That if there's evidence proof required for a particular entitlement, that might be something that the booking system, the seller, handles.
Right. But it can also potentially be something that the broker handles.
It's not exactly. If you don't, that's right. If the booking system's configured themselves so that nothing returns an evidence request, then obviously that's on the broker to then have the confidence in that. And then I imagine there's that kind of similar out of bound conversation there where between the broker and the various systems and sellers involved, there's got to be an agreement about who is actually doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And then that can be
Right. Okay. Okay, but that feels like a large systems configuration change if that varies across different sites, for instance. So if I was one vendor and I had just say that MCR Active and Active Westminster handle these things quite differently, I would be doing significantly different tooling on those two sites, wouldn't I?
Yeah, so it's I guess it's a it's not massively significant in that it's only the difference is whether there's a dependency between the entitlements across different systems. That's it. So in some cases there will be a dependence. So this entitlement relies on these. This system is the authority. Any evidence requests get rejected. They get rejected everywhere else. So it's just whether that authority exists or not. If it doesn't, it might be that the broker has that authority.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of setting that authority is existing or not.
Okay. Right. And shared understanding about whether you expect this information. Yeah. How much you trust broker information as against internal. Oh gosh. Right. Okay. Sorry, I'm seeing how this fits together now. And yeah, it is sort of out of scope, but it does seem like it wouldn't be possible to standardize it, but it does seem, again, like a part of a large agreement that has to exist for this to all operate well. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically who looks after the evidence. I mean, maybe it could be. I don't know what you think about the level of guidance or non-normative stuff we put in this, but we could have a very brief section that just says evidence request like options or something, and it's just like 1 is the broker does it, 2 is a booking system does it, 3 is it doesn't happen or there isn't a need for it, or something.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this on previous calls, actually, that I think we probably need either a whole separate document or a big appendix that is, here are some things you need to agree upon that are non-normative before this is really implementable. Because once you've agreed on those things, the decisions you make technically are going to be very obvious. But if you haven't agreed those things, you're just going to be floundering. Yeah. I think this was the problem that was confronting me looking at these two sections, was I just couldn't quite see how the evidence request action was supposed to work. And I now realize it's because actually it is quite flexible, that there's a multitude of patterns that this supports, which is good. I think that's nice in a standard. But yeah, it means that the complexity is shifted elsewhere into an out-of-bound discussion. Okay. Debbie, do you have any concerns you'd like to raise about all of that? Or have you already input as much as you need to?
Not at the moment. I don't have any other concerns.
Okay. Okay. Where are we then? Let me just revert to the presentation. Great. So C9, customer account, person update action. I suppose the trivial point is that should this be, it gets nasty. Because the customer could be an organization, couldn't it?
Sorry, absolutely should have been updated following our last discussion on this. Apologies. Let me just quickly go and find out from whatever appendix it was in that we had this discussion.
I think the problem is we end up with, if I remember rightly, we end up with customer account, customer update action.
Think, yeah, or is it just customer? It might just be customer update action though. Yes, it is customer update action.
Okay, great. Okay, fantastic.
So I'll just update.
And then I guess equally, this needs to change.
Do you mind just clicking where you are, Tim? Sorry, so I can jump to your. Oh, you've got it open twice. Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry, I got a couple.
Yeah.
Reference points there. Yeah. Okay, great. That is not too ugly. Okay, cool. And then yeah, we've got schema object should be a person or a customer, I suppose. Sorry, or an organization. I think the other slight point is schema error, the optional array of open booking errors. Have we got all of those errors defined in relation to updating customers?
That is a great point. No, that would be a really good appendix to add, actually.
Right, okay.
Because we don't have.
This is going to be quite a specific range of errors, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly. Making sure that there are errors defined throughout the document, but they're not in an organized place.
Mm-hmm.
The table that exists in the booking spec of errors is quite good.
Yeah. I actually really like that table. I find it documentationally really helpful. Like jumping to here's all the things that can go wrong is a kind of nice sort of introduction to, it's almost like test-driven development from a documentation point of view. Start with the things that happen bad.
Yeah, although I think part of the issue is it's a claim that these are all the things that can go wrong.
Yeah, that's true.
Not necessarily the case. Yeah.
Yeah, the point about action status type, I think there might be a point that needs to get raised with regard to Appendix D. But we can jump there now. Okay, so that's customer update action taken care of. And then it's about the actual endpoints. We should jump in just a moment. No, hold on, try that again. Okay, that's annoying. I have to scroll. Okay, great. Yes, the point I was about to make is taken care of there. So yes, you've got the updated endpoint. This pattern I thought made sense. The rationale is quite good. But it might be a little counterintuitive, and I'd be interested to hear Matt and Nathan's views on this in particular, I suppose. So if you update the various fields in the customer account, even if one or two of them fail, you still get a 200 code back, along with an array of errors. And it's only the case that you get an error status code back if in fact you're not allowed to perform that particular action. So I'd just like to sanity check that with Matt and Nathan, that this is a pattern that they would expect.
I do just want to check because I think that there is another status code that indicates partial success.
That's interesting.
I just want to find out what it is.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can enjoy the rationale to that is that because there's multiple systems involved, obviously, and the broker has this kind of record of the truth. If the broker was to say, I want to update, so the broker has an update, the broker gets told that the email address has changed, the name's changed, the phone number's changed. Someone's got married and moved house. So the broker can then obviously ping that update to all systems. So everyone gets that update. The problem is, of course, that if one system, that's the kind of latest information that we have from the broker. If one system for some reason fails to acknowledge the update, then it's kind of difficult to explain what's happened if you kind of have a complete failure and you end up in a situation where someone's kind of editing one of the fields to kind of make it fit with or whatever it is that's failed. So by having it update everything it can update, that means that the data is as good as it can be. And if the user wants to go back and kind of amend one of the fields so that it makes the update in all systems for that one field, that they can do. The risk otherwise is that you end up in a bit of a cycle, I suppose, from the user's point of view, where you're trying to update, trying to amend all your fields.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like this should be. I've just had a look. I can't find the code that I thought was, so it probably doesn't exist. It feels like this should more be a 202 accepted, because you might not be able to indicate immediately whether these things have completed or not, especially if you're updating lots of different systems. Basically, isn't the indication that you want to update these, not necessarily that you can. And then I guess it's the client's responsibility later to see if the data is the same. Because, I mean, what's the expectation if you get an error back? Is it just to notify the customer?
Yeah, exactly. The update hasn't happened to notify the customer. So I guess it would be something like your email address cannot be added. Your email address cannot be updated in booking system A. Please log in directly to that booking system to update it.
Yeah. So if you're connected to, say, 10 booking systems, you don't want to have to wait for all of them to respond in order to update your customer details, because that could take a very long time, especially if, say, the second booking system is unavailable.
Yes, that's a good
or
point.
is having some kind of outage, then you kind of want it just to accept a request if possible as soon as possible. And then say, like, your details have been requested to be updated.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good point. I do wonder whether that 202 is something that would be, is that 202 though at the broker API end? And the reason I say that is, or ask that, is because if it's about scheduling as a separate job, those updates, maybe it goes off and pings all of these individually, waits for the responses, and it comes back. But I guess that I'm just wondering whether the requests themselves for the individual systems are still kind of complete or not, 200 or something, or 40 something. Because then I guess if we take the accepted pattern, then we'd need webhooks or something to then resolve the thing. And so it may, I wonder what so is it like guidance for the broker almost, in that, as you say, yeah, crazy to wait for 10 systems. So maybe doing it as a separate job and then returning to the customer.
Yeah, I think it does depend at the booking system how many systems they need to talk to and how long they're going to take to respond, and if they can guarantee response within a reasonable time. Because if you're updating lots of different systems, some of which might be uncontactable, then that's kind of like an internal detail.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, because the thing is that we haven't, this spec doesn't include any kind of webhookiness or order feediness, anything like that to resolve the, if there were long running things happening that needed status updates. So I mean, I don't know whether, is it a fair assumption that within whatever the 30-second timeout of a REST request, it would be able to be completed for all systems that this currently supports, for example?
I mean, I guess if you're talking about from the broker's perspective, so the customer's made the request to the broker, you can't guarantee because you have no idea how many booking systems you have.
Totally.
So the errors basically saying that these details can't be updated, you can never guarantee that they're going to be returned to the customer anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily see what the point of those is.
Well, I suppose when the out of band job happens, so those error messages have to come back somewhere, I guess. And so when that out of band job happens, or sorry, that out of band, when that separate batch job happens or whatever, and they update the details maybe in 10 minutes time, that job goes off, makes the request, gets the errors back, and then I guess however those errors are delivered back to the customer, app notification, email, or something, I guess then the broker can decide to navigate those options. But yeah, so it sounds like there's basically is it a case that the broker needs to, because this is probably the same actually across the barcode updates and the other updates, as you say, it's a case of the broker needs to think, like, don't just send out 15 requests and expect them all to come back within your 30-second window where you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're talking to something on site, there could be loads of different connection issues.
So it does. So I wonder, is this kind of guidance for the broker then to just bear that in mind?
Yeah, I'd assume so. Although I guess the issue is from the booking system side. I guess the booking system doesn't really matter if it's going to do it in band or out of band. But I feel like the more common pattern will be out of band, right? Because especially if you're updating something like you mentioned, like barcode or anything that needs to talk to some hardware that's actually at the venue, then that needs to be done in a separate request because it could fail, and then you need to be able to retry it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Well, yeah, I mean the Flow, Legend, Gladstone all do it synchronously at the moment, i.e. they update the barcode. Now, that's a good point. They don't do it synchronously fully within the system. They synchronously accept the request, but it might be that propagating that barcode throughout the rest of the system takes 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, exactly.
But they don't. But they accept the request. What's the word? Authoritatively, atomically. Like they accept the request in a way it's not going to get rejected later. It's like I got the barcode. It just might take 5 minutes to propagate through my eventually consistent.
Right. Yeah. So I guess saying completed action isn't necessarily correct, because the errors are probably going to be validation errors rather than actual kind of process errors.
That's a good point. Yeah, definitely. Okay.
So yeah, having 200 fine if we're just going to say if it's a 200, then that means there aren't any validation errors with your data.
Yeah. So instead of a completed action status, it could be accepted action status or something.
Yeah.
To imply that. Yeah. Just have a look at the schema set of actions, which is massive. Cool. I'll add a note so we can move on my way. So
we'll probably also need a 422 response from this as well, if there are any validation errors.
422 again is sorry.
Unprocessable entity.
So at the moment, what is it called?
So it's basically the actual HTTP structure of the request is correct, but the data inside it is incorrect.
Data inside is incorrect.
I think so that's the question, though, isn't it? It's some of the data might be correct, some of it causes a validation error. The bits that are correct should be accepted. The one that causes a validation error should be a message indicating the reason why that particular bit wasn't accepted is returned, but it's a 200 response to say the request itself was
Oh, I see.
successfully.
Yes. Yeah. Then yeah, you're right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a bit meta because the post request is actually for the action. So the action is the thing that's getting okay, or rather than for the thing itself. So I suppose the action could still be accepted or something.
Right, sorry, so is it this that's at issue, or is it the HTTP status code, or is it both?
I think the status codes are okay. I think it's that action status should be pending access status, like Nick suggested.
Okay.
But that said, it is a bit odd, but it's feasible, isn't it? I mean, like, you would expect that if there were any validation errors for the whole thing to be rejected. If that's what I would usually expect for it. But that's not to say that it has to be the case. And if it's documented accordingly, then it's fine.
Yeah.
So what's the reasoning behind doing partial updates of this?
As I suppose, as we were saying about the use case of it, they might get emailed back 10 minutes later saying such and such a field wasn't updated, rather than so it's to optimize for the systems, all booking systems being as up to date as possible with the user's action. So let's say, for example, that someone puts too many characters in one of the fields and it gets rejected. Oh, that's a good point, actually. It wouldn't be helpful to partially update an address, would it, with address line 1 and address line 2 being updated?
Exactly, yeah. So you could get some.
You probably want the whole thing or nothing. Yeah. That's a really good guidance point, actually. If sticking with this approach, you'd expect the address to be atomic in that respect if you fail to update part of the address. But it might be that the more likely example with the email address example is your email address can't be updated because it matches a duplicate record on the system or who knows what else. And so 10 minutes later, you get a reply back saying, your email address wasn't updated in this one system. You might not care. The user might not care enough to go back in, and because the thing is, from their perspective, they're continuing to book and everything else is fine, right? There's no need for them to fully update their data in order to continue to use the system. So they might not go back and tweak it so that one of the 10 booking systems is happy, if that's what has happened.
Yeah. Don't you have a weird state there where the broker you've got 2 different emails on your account?
That could exist in any case because you can link any email address account to your broker account. So it might be that. Yeah, so and also when you make that first linking, there's no expectation that the data is overwritten at that stage, and so it's I guess potentially a tick box where someone's updating the details in the broker, and there's a tick box at the bottom saying update all other booking systems with the same information, and they tick the box, and then it fires off the requests. And
we don't separate name into first name and last name, do we?
We do, yeah.
Okay. So if someone's updating a name, it could potentially update their first name or their last name, but not both.
It's true. I'm not sure how that might. Yeah, I guess if you've done a dpoll across, Elton John or something, maybe. Yeah. It's a good point. That is a really interesting edge case, isn't it? I was just about to comment on this example. Address, it would need to be atomic for address and atomic for emergency contact, because obviously emergency contact name and telephone can't. Yeah. They have to match, don't they? Yeah.
Right. So we've got 3 exceptions to the atomicity rule, or rather, the lack of atomicity rule.
Well, I don't know. Do we need the name one? Because I was just thinking now, if it's as simple as it's the first level of the object that is atomic, you see what I mean? So address is obviously there's components inside the address that just needs to be atomic update, and emergency contact, there's components inside that needs to be atomic as well. That kind of handles the issue there. I don't know with name and surname. can they just be separate? What does that say?
I mean, we are looking at edge cases, but I mean, married name, I guess, would be a fairly common case that you'd run into.
Yeah. I'm trying to imagine why you change your full name and surname at the same time, and why it would matter if only one of those was updated.
Some people do it for religious reasons. So they'll have a religious name. So I think Mormons do that. They'll take a new Christian name and a new surname, depending on what church you're in.
Fine. So
there are definitely cases where it could happen.
Yeah, it's the outer edge case of the outer edge case, isn't it? It's interesting. Yeah. And also that would be assuming that they exceeded the character limits with that name, or whatever. I don't know what validation you know is applied to name.
Well, a validation I've often seen, well, not necessarily validation, but errors with character encodings sometimes turns up. Yeah.
Special characters.
Yeah.
So it gets rejected from one of the systems for having special characters in it.
Yeah, because the system doesn't handle non-ASCII codes or something.
Right. Yeah, I'm just thinking, what if that happened and then you got an update saying as a user that family name wasn't updated, but everything else was.
Yeah.
I wonder whether that would be. I mean, it's still. If you contacted that person and said, "I'm looking for, old surname, new first name," or vice versa, you probably still know who they were talking about. I'm just trying to think what the, if it's worth, because and the reason I'm saying that is because it's a nice rule otherwise to just say it's atomicity at the property level of the person, and this would kind of be a bit of a break to that logic, which is then that everyone has to put that extra bit of complexity in their code. So,
yeah, it's a tricky one. How much complexity is that, though? Actually, I mean, if we just made this so that it wasn't about partial updates, that the entire thing was atomic.
Well, that's a different thing. Making the entire thing atomic is a different design, I suppose, because that's the argument about the common case where something will not be updated for an email address being duplicated or whatever reason, and that, as mentioned, like creating the problem where we haven't actually captured as many updates as we could have done for those other booking systems, and wanting to kind of optimize for as many of those details being updated as possible.
Is the expectation, though, that people will, within the broker system, have a screen where they can update absolutely everything about themselves, and that they're actually going to be doing that on a not regular, but that doesn't seem likely to me. People will be coming in and they'll be updating one bit of information: their family name, their address, or their email address. Not all of them at the same time. So it almost might be a problem, solving a problem that isn't going to exist.
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose it's unlikely you change too much, but you could imagine changing address, telephone number, and surname at the same time in the event of marriage.
True.
Yeah, potentially email address as well.
But then if that failed atomically at a booking system, like you say, we managed to update it everywhere except for sports. So you're going to have to go and talk to, or except for We Play Football. So We Play Football still have your old data. You'll have to update them themselves. If they have to go and update all of that information at We Play Football at the same time, it's not necessarily a big issue.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. It's a lot clearer from a user's perspective, and it's probably a lot easier for a broker to handle with just say, at this booking system, it didn't update, rather than saying, oh, well, your last name updated, but your email address is invalid, and then but your address is fine. That kind of stuff. That's a lot more complexity on the broker side.
Yeah, although the email address being the common one, that's probably, because that's the only one where there's probably a unique constraint on it. that's the one that, yeah, I suspect that might be the one which is the most common issue. And they probably,
I think that's going to be the one that will be updated on its own. I mean, yes, you've given the example of somebody getting married and doing all of that stuff, but my wife still uses Abs Mitchell at Hotmail for her email. You know, she didn't change her personal email address when we got married. I don't think people, I think that if they're going to change their email address, it's because they've done it for some other reason, not because they're moving house at the same time. So it's likely that that would be just an atomic failure anyway.
mm. Yeah, I guess that could, yeah, that could be, couldn't it, as an atomic failure? I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it's a like a which is the worst of the things.
I think ending up in an inconsistent state is the worst of the things. So yeah, part of it's updated, but part of it hasn't.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Even from a system standpoint, if it's not that complicated to solve, from a communication standpoint with the customer, that's very complicated.
But does that mean then? So just thinking about how that works from a retry perspective. Let's say the email. So I suppose most common case here would be the kind of 90% case would be someone's tried to update their email address, maybe on its own. That update hasn't worked. So they're then told to, well, I suppose what are they told? So if it fails at a kind of total update level, then they're told that the update's failed, and they need to go and update that system with the email address.
When you say total failure, you mean the total failure at one booking system, as opposed to
absolutely,
it failed at one, so we're not doing it at any of. It's just a.
Well, this is it. Yeah. So well, I suppose let's say that it's only for a couple of booking systems and it's happening inbound. So they press the save button, and then the error messages come back. So it's happening synchronously to make it simple. So if that happens synchronously and they press the save button, and then it sends off 2-3 requests, they come back, and one of them's failed. If it's failed for the email address reason, but they've changed something else in one of the other fields, or they haven't, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to think how you would, because what you then need to do to successfully update is you need to resubmit the update without the email address change, with the other information change, so that you can make the change. But if the email address is already changed in the broker side, how are you're gonna have to omit that detail from the next update in order to make the update work? Do you see what I mean? Let's say that you've already updated your email address to be the new one on the broker. You now can't make any updates at all until you either omit email address completely from the update, because that will allow everything else to be updated, or until you match the old email address that was in the system before.
It sounds like you're suggesting that when you send a customer update action, you can only specify things that have changed. And if there's a conflict with something that's already the same, then it will cause errors.
So sorry, I meant more if you as a broker just send everything that you've got and say this is the update. If there's a problem where one of the fields is invalid and that invalidates the entire request, for example, most likely email address, it's duplicate or whatever, it can't be updated, therefore everything else is invalid, that prevents you from updating any other fields. That's the challenge. You see, until the email address exactly either matches until that email address is valid in some form, either by being the old email address or by omitting the field. But the logic as a broker you'll need to come up with to figure that out, though. So you've got the request has failed, and what that means is that the only recourse for the broker at that point is going to be log into the booking system directly and make the update, which might be okay for some use cases, but also if it's just the email address that's failed, might not be. I mean, might be an unnecessary amount of. It might not be, and I suppose that's as that's the most common case. That might be not as a desirable user journey to make the user log into their system to update whatever 2 fields because the email address was invalid.
Yeah, I guess in that flow, you're going to have to log into the system to be able to solve it, the email address issue.
If you needed to, I mean, you might not care, I suppose, about these systems as much. Or
Oh, I see. So it's perfectly fine for your customer state in the broker to be out of sync with the customer state of the broker system.
yeah,
The booking system.
exactly that. They might, in fact, they might. So if when they link the accounts, they were linking a different email address, it might be that email address, was always different.
Well, in that case, how are you going to know not to update the email address when they come to update the email address in the broker system? So they use a different email address to log into the booking system, then they update their email address in the broker system, but they don't want to update the email address in the booking system because they used a different. How do you know not to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose that's a broker
Different
UX
thing. Yeah.
I mean, they could either they get prompted for that, or I guess it just tries and then returns an error when it fails, and doesn't matter because everything else was updated.
A slight
just,
tangent.
yeah.
But if you're updating your email address and you use your email address to log into the booking system, then that might change your login. And I'm not sure if that would be expected as a customer. If you're in system A and you update your email address and then you try to log into system B and your username has changed because it's your email address, I guess, would that be confusing?
It's a good question. Yeah.
It would
Especially
be
if you're
unless you were.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say it would be unless it had been made very clear at the point when you're doing the update that, by the way, this is also going to update this system and this system and this system and this system. And
Yeah.
of course, people won't read that anyway. But yeah, there would definitely need to be some way to make that clear.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I wonder whether that actually should be a different, whether that would be a message that came back in as part of this response as maybe an error. I don't know. Or something just to say, this has changed your login for this system. You must now log in with blah because you've updated your email address. Yeah,
with a lot of systems, though, you might have an awful lot of these messages, and then you're just going to get message blindness and not read them all.
True. Yeah. It's difficult because exactly. It's this. Yeah, this is actually originally the requirement. Although obviously it's a thing that everyone's supportive of. I think the suggestion originally came from Everyone Active. So maybe Debbie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this in terms of, I mean, how much would you care, for example, if email address?
Nick's just throwing you under the bus. How do you feel?
No, not in. He's like, paddle back. No, I mean.
I think that, I don't know whether the suggestion did come from me, not specifically in this. It may have come from Dave about making sure the data was kept in sync across all the systems.
Dave, yes.
But just because the suggestion made doesn't mean I have a solution for you. Like, it needs to be kept in sync. There's no point in them being different. The question I have, but I was waiting for all this to finish, was what's the expectation if it's updated in the booking system? Should that then be pushed through to the broker system as well? I don't know, and is that documented? But that's after this part. I think that's the other way around, isn't it?
Yes, and I have an answer.
It will just cause more confusion and conflict of what you've just been talking about. So,
yeah, it's two-way sync. Sorry, Debbie, I didn't mean to. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's handled separately. So I guess we could cover that maybe after. I mean, what do we want to do about? So I think possibly the question is maybe a requirements one here, because if the expectation is that the user, it's either all or nothing. If they don't successfully update because the email address is not possible to update, then they have to go and log in themselves and fix the problem, because creating a flow in the broker where they are able to go and make multiple calls depending on what bit's failing and what bit's succeeding is obviously that's where the issue arises, which I think is the problem this is solving. So stop that cycle of like the broker trying to make an update by removing random fields until it makes a successful call.
Yeah, exactly.
So I suppose the question is, either the broker's got the ability to update what it can, and obviously if we address an emergency contact and potentially name being kind of taken together there, so that it's not inconsistent, or the broker basically, if there's any failure for any reason, then that's kind of they need to do it themselves manually, and that's kind of what it is. But I don't know how we. Yeah, I don't know if that it feels like that's almost a requirements question, because we remove a feature from the remove a feature from the broker here in terms of keeping things in sync if we kind of force an entire update, which might be okay. I don't know. I don't know if we want to surface it on the requirements call maybe as an example, or unless anyone has any other thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible question. It's just basically kind of go back to requirement and say, like, why was this asked for, and kind of like what is it solving that can't just be saying your customer details at X broker, X booking system are out of date, and you need to log in to fix it.
Oh, the other point to mention is that you don't necessarily have a login, because if you've gone through the create process, you may have never logged into this booking system before, so you might not have a relationship with them. But for example, that other booking system, you might have the email address already associated with a different account. So your change of email address has failed on the booking system you've never logged in before too, but because actually you forgot you logged into it 10 years ago and created an account with a different email address that you're now trying to use.
That's a different response though, really, isn't it? It's like, because they could then link that existing account to their broker account. That's what they should have done in the first place, if that's what they wanted to do. You know what I mean? As in, that's a whole separate flow that they then follow, which is to say, oh, you couldn't update it because there's already an email address. Past, email address enumeration concerns aside, couldn't update it because you've already got, you can connect that account to this one though if you want to, by following this flow.
Yes, that's interesting, and that could be an error message, couldn't it? That could be in the error message. Well, in as this is currently proposed, that could literally be in the update email error message, just so that the user sees. It just says, try connecting your account instead.
But I feel like it's more of a broker's job to handhold them through that process, as in, here's how to do it. That's what the broker can tell them. The broker system can say, click here to connect this account to your broker account instead of the other one. Don't know.
Good point. So shall I just document both these? So that was a point on the email. So this could trigger broker to guide the user to connect their other account, and then separately on the Atomus too.
So I think the difficulty, if we make this a requirements conversation, which I think it should be, is how we communicate this, because I feel like it's a flow question, which makes me think it's probably about wireframes.
Yeah.
Because I think probably going through it verbally is going to be a nightmare for people who aren't deep into this stuff.
You're right. It probably needs wireframes to show them where that would go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, if MCR, depends on where MCR is in the process, because it'd be really great just to demo what they've got. Say, is this what you want? Do you want something else? Because I think because they are developing against this, and I don't know if they've got as far as the screen where. So I will actually partly answers Debbie's question as well. So Debbie talks about how the update happens. There's an update that comes the other direction. So if there's an update in the booking system, customer gets it, and the way MCR displays that is kind of your GLL account has been updated with new information. Do you want to update your account to match? And then there's tick boxes against each field that you can choose to take them all across or untick the ones you don't want to copy over. and that type of idea. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess it may be. I don't know if they've done that the other direction. If you want to update this information in all the other booking systems, or if it's just a case of it just tries to do it for all of them and see what breaks. But it's a long way of saying MCR might have done the wireframes for us. So we don't need to spend the time drawing them.
Okay, well then I'll put that in action on me. Is it Anne-Marie who'd be the relevant person to talk to about that, or is there somebody closer to the implementation?
Probably Nish.
Oh, Nish, okay. Can I leave that with you then, Nick?
Sure.
To check in on where MCR is on this, because yeah, it feels like a whole nest of wireframes to communicate the different options, which would be a pain. Okay. Right. Okay. So requirements there, and the other point I'd make, I suppose, is if this is about the other W3C call, the more requirements focused W3C call, that's going to be the 22nd of December would be the earliest opportunity we'd have to discuss this, and I suspect the timing of that would be quite bad. So then we'd be looking at into the very beginning of 2022 to discuss that requirements issue.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, while you're on Jeff Capes, I misidentified him as a professional wrestler last time. He's actually is a circus strongman type, and was for a time Britain's strongest man. Either way, I think the point remains that probably we should choose a less identifiable individual for the examples.
That's it. Understood. For that comment as well.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Also, he wasn't born in January 1st, 1970. And indeed, is I think probably gender male would be more accurate. But
Okay. Gosh.
or maybe we can keep it that way. I mean, it shows that we're not talking about the Jeff Capes of athletic fame. But
Opening up cans of worms after cans of worms here, haven't we?
Yeah. Okay, requirements captured there then. Okay, not too long left on the call.
Do you want me to just should we visit the Debbie's question there, Tim, on the updates the other way quickly, or?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. We can unpick that. Sorry, I was folding that into the larger requirements question, but is there a different?
Oh, it's a totally different flow, actually. It's the if we go up to D2, the way this works with MCR, at least Westminster, and obviously others could do different things, is just simply that this, because D2, which is the D2 is the kind of everything response. So you in here you get the customer details, you get the access pass, you get the entitlements, you get the outstanding actions in one response, and so that is periodically checked by the broker, or can be.
Mm-hmm.
And any updates to anything in there can then be updated to the customer accordingly. So if the outstanding action has appeared that wasn't there before, if there's an entitlement that's changed, then you might want to revoke other entitlements as discussed. If the access pass has changed, then you might want to update the broker's access pass. If the customer has changed, then you might want to prompt the customer to update their details. And so that is a prompt that then the broker then displays to say, so something's changed in this booking system. What do you want to do about it?
So is the broker maintaining a record of the state of the customer in all of the booking systems to compare it against, and then that way it knows what's changed, as opposed to it's just comparing it against its own set of data? Because otherwise you'll every time you log in, you'll be saying this address changed, but it didn't. It's just we don't want to update.
Exactly that. In fact, it might be worth us adding that. I don't know if that's worth it. It's one of those other things that's kind of broker level things that we want to put it in this, or just add guidance around it. But yeah, exactly that. It's a hash of the data. So if the data changes, the hash changes, then it's an update, and then that's something that can be. But yeah, it's a hash of the data as was, rather than what's currently in the booking, in the in the broker, because obviously if the broker changes their data, they don't necessarily match.
Sorry, I've lost the thread. So are we clear on requirements here?
Oh, so that was more an explanation of the way that the problem that Debbie was talking about, it could be solved using the specification. Well, my point was more that the spec itself doesn't talk to that at the moment, because it's something that you can do with it rather than it's part of it. But we could add a guidance note or something to explain how one could use the spec as it stands to do an update in that direction.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I'm with you now. Okay.
How does the broker know that a change which has occurred was not a change that was instigated by itself? So the broker updates the address on the booking system, periodically checks the hash doesn't match. So that, how does it know not to say, oh, the data's changed from here to there? I suppose it matches its own data at that point.
Yeah, so as the spec is currently proposed, when you make an update to the customer data, as it's a partial update currently, the response that comes back is the state of the record. So if you make a partial update and only 3 fields changed and the rest have errors, the response comes back with those 3 fields changed, and then you just hash that response.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. So D4, I feel like we might already have dealt with. We did discuss initialization at an earlier point. I just wanted to sanity check this one as well. Sorry, I just need to scroll quite a bit. So initializing the customer account following account creation. So there was some complexity around when an account was initialized and the kinds of timeouts that would be required for initialization. This particular endpoint seems to me unproblematic, given the previous discussion on those complexities. Once again, however, it's a partial update in exactly the same way as the preceding conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Does that raise similar requirements issues?
Well, the issue is actually a slightly, yeah, okay. So if this wasn't a partial update, this has the same problem, but in a different way. The same problem, but there's no workaround this time. So, in that we can't post them to the system to update their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The reason this is a partial update is because in order to do anything with that account, you need to initialize it. There's no way of posting the customer data through to the booking system through the create request of OAuth of OpenID Connect.
Right. Okay. So this is a stub, essentially, necessarily.
Yeah, that's right. So OpenID Connect create will create just a stub with the email address only. And then to get all the other data in there, you have to then follow up with another call, which is this one, which then has all the bits and bobs that someone's obviously as it knows. But if for some reason there's a validation issue with something there, then I suppose the question, that kind of recurring issue we had last time of if it fails and it fails entirely, then how do we know which field to tweak or change to then successfully initialize so that we can carry on using the account and everything else can kind of continue? Because we're back to kind of, maybe it was this one that failed for a validation error, or maybe the response comes back with an array of where the issues were, and then the broker retries without those error fields, for example, and then tries to do it again. Could work. So yeah, maybe that's something like that. You could make it. You could do only allow entire updates, but then force the. But then the broker would have to retry without the fields that come back as an error in order to successfully initialize. Which I suppose it could actually do that same retry thing on the other to kind of create a partial update type approach. just by retrying off what was missing in the errors. Yeah.
And Matt and Nathan, does that have any implications for your systems?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I must admit, I've missed this bit. I think it was probably in the meeting that I missed, and I need to go back and review it because it's obviously quite complicated, but it's been through a few people's eyes already, so it's probably all fine. The 500 error for indicating that the initialization failed for any other reason, is that the right response? 500 usually being server error.
That's a really good point. It shouldn't be, should it? 500 is not an expected error by definition, is it?
Yep.
It's so that should, if that's there at all, that should probably be a 500. It says unexpected initialization or something error, but I imagine that should just be a 400, should it?
Some variety of 4 something, I should think.
Does anyone know which 4?
Was it 424, which is the one that we've looked at?
422 is invalid data. I guess maybe a 409 might be
Conflict.
Yeah, might be a reasonable response.
Any other reason?
Sorry, was really for, okay. It's not necessarily a conflict, right?
That's true. But actually the one above it could be.
Yeah, I was just gonna, yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. If that's a 409 and then 0.5 is a 400.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good points.
So can we draw a distinction between 3 and 5? In terms of the codes returned?
Yeah, so should 3 be a 409? Oh, 5, sorry.
That's method not allowed. So maybe 3 should be 422.
Can't be updated.
Or a 403. Forbidden.
Forbidden because the email address cannot be.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're
Okay,
unable to do that.
Great, good.
Brilliant. Oh, sorry, that's not. Yeah.
Right, okay. Well, we've only got 1 minute on the call, and that was, I thought, a very satisfying last minute of
tweaking
clear decision.
Good reason. Yeah.
So just, yeah, with 1 minute left, is there any other points anybody would like to raise?
Nothing from me.
Okay, I'll just scroll to the top and try to find which section was focused on initialization for Matt's later reference then. Let's see here. Oh, hold on. Where was that? Right, okay. So yes, this would be in section 2. Yeah, creating a new customer account, where it should have been, obviously. So yeah, if you want to review that, because yeah, there was some complexity falling out of that.
Sure.
And other than that, I'll just say thank you all hugely for your participation on the call. Nick, thank you for walking us through the rationale so lucidly. And to Nathan and Matt for having such incredibly fine-grained eyes that they could investigate the issues. So thank you very much, and I'll see you.
And Debbie. You can get a call out.
No contribution at all today from me.
That's not so.
Well, for Debbie for pointing out huge areas of haziness, actually, around what was expected.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, broad focus, narrow focus, all covered by everyone on the call. Thank you so much. Okay, bye.
Hello.
Cheers.